The greater set of questions and answers. Mahā Vedalla Sutta, Majjhima Nikāya 43. I have heard that on one occasion, the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi, in Jetta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then, Venerable Mahā, emerging from his seclusion in the evening, went to Venerable Sāriputta, and, on arrival, exchanged courteous greetings with him. After an exchange of friendly greetings and courtesies, he sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to Venerable Sāriputta, "Friend, one of poor discernment, one of poor discernment. Thus it is said, to what extent is one said to be one of poor discernment? One doesn't discern, one doesn't discern. Thus, friend, one is said to be one of poor discernment. And what doesn't one discern? One doesn't discern. This is stress. One doesn't discern. This is the origination of stress. One doesn't discern. This is the cessation of stress. One doesn't discern. This is the practice leading to the cessation of stress. One doesn't discern. One doesn't discern. Thus one is said to be one of poor discernment." Saying, "Very good, friend," Venerable Mahā, delighting in and approving of Venerable Sāriputta's statement, asked him a further question. Discerning, discerning. Thus it is said, to what extent, friend, is one said to be discerning? One discerns, one discerns. Thus, friend, one is said to be discerning. And what does one discern? One discerns, this is stress. One discerns, this is the origination of stress. One discerns, this is the cessation of stress. One discerns, this is the practice leading to the cessation of stress. One discerns, one discerns. Thus, one is said to be discerning. Consciousness, consciousness. Thus it is said, to what extent, friend, is it said to be consciousness? It cognizes, it cognizes. Thus, friend, it is said to be consciousness. And what does it cognize? It cognizes pleasant. It cognizes painful. It cognizes neither pleasant nor painful. It cognizes, it cognizes. Thus it is said to be consciousness. Discernment and consciousness, friend. Are these qualities conjoined or disjoined? Is it possible, having separated one from the other, to delineate the difference between them? Discernment and consciousness are conjoined, friend, not disjoined. It is not possible, having separated them one from the other, to delineate the difference between them. For what one discerns, one cognizes. What one cognizes, one discerns. Therefore, these qualities are conjoined, not disjoined, and it is not possible, having separated them one from the other, to delineate the difference between them. Discernment and consciousness, friend. What is the difference between these qualities that are conjoined, not disjoined? Discernment and consciousness, friend. Of these qualities that are conjoined, not disjoined, discernment is to be developed, consciousness is to be fully comprehended. Feeling, feeling. Thus it is said, to what extent, friend, is it said to be feeling? It feels, it feels. Thus, friend, it is said to be feeling. And what does it feel? It feels pleasure. It feels pain. It feels neither pleasure nor pain. It feels. Thus it is said to be feeling. Perception. Thus it is said. To what extent, friend, is it said to be perception? It perceives. Thus, friend, it is said to be perception. And what does it perceive? It perceives blue. It perceives yellow. It perceives red. It perceives white. It perceives. Thus it is said to be perception. Feeling, perception, and consciousness, friend. Are these qualities conjoined or disjoined? Is it possible, having separated them one from another, to delineate the difference among them? Feeling, perception, and consciousness are conjoined, friend, not disjoined. It is not possible, having separated them one from another, to delineate the difference among them. For what one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, that one cognizes. Therefore, these qualities are conjoined, not disjoined, and it is not possible, having separated them one from another, to delineate the difference among them. Friend, what can be known with the purified intellect consciousness released from the 5 sense faculties? Friend, with the purified intellect consciousness released from the 5 sense faculties, the dimension of the infinitude of space can be known, infinite space. The dimension of the infinitude of consciousness can be known, infinite consciousness. The dimension of nothingness can be known. There is nothing. With what does one know a quality that can be known? One knows a quality that can be known with the eye of discernment. And what is the purpose of discernment? The purpose of discernment is direct knowledge. Its purpose is full comprehension. Its purpose is abandoning. Friend, how many conditions are there for the arising of right view? Friend, there are 2 conditions for the arising of right view: the voice of another and appropriate attention. These are the 2 conditions for the arising of right view. And assisted by how many factors does right view have awareness release as its fruit and reward, and discernment release as its fruit and reward? Assisted by 5 factors, right view has awareness release as its fruit and reward, and discernment release as its fruit and reward. There is the case where right view is assisted by virtue, assisted by learning, assisted by discussion, assisted by tranquility, assisted by insight. Assisted by these 5 factors, right view has awareness release as its fruit and reward, and discernment release as its fruit and reward. Friend, how many kinds of becoming are there? Friend, there are these 3 kinds of becoming: sensual becoming, form becoming, and formless becoming. And how is further becoming in the future brought about? The delight, now here, now there, of beings, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. That's how further becoming in the future is brought about. And how is further becoming in the future not brought about? through the fading of ignorance, the arising of clear knowing, and the cessation of craving. That's how further becoming in the future is not brought about. What, friend, is the first jhana? There is the case, friend, where a monk, quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by thought and evaluation. This is called the first jhana. And how many factors does the first jhana have? The first jhana has 5 factors. There is the case where, in a monk who has attained the 5-factored first jhana, there occurs thought, evaluation, rapture, pleasure, and singleness of mind. It's in this way that the first jhana has 5 factors. And how many factors are abandoned in the first jhana? And with how many is it endowed? 5 factors are abandoned in the first jhana, and with 5 is it endowed. There is the case where, in a monk who has attained the first jhana, sensual desire is abandoned, ill will is abandoned, sloth and torpor is abandoned, restlessness and anxiety is abandoned, uncertainty is abandoned, and there occur thought, evaluation, rapture, pleasure, and singleness of mind. It's in this way that 5 factors are abandoned in the first jhana, and with 5 it is endowed. Friend, there are these 5 faculties, each with a separate range, a separate domain, and they do not experience one another's range and domain. The eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, and the body faculty. Now, what do these 5 faculties, each with a separate range, a separate domain, not experiencing one another's range and domain, the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, and the body faculty, have as their common arbitrator? What experiences all their ranges and domains? Friends, these 5 faculties, each with a separate range, a separate domain, not experiencing one another's range and domain, the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, and the body faculty, have the intellect as their common arbitrator. The intellect is what experiences all their ranges and domains. Now, these 5 faculties, the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, and the body faculty, in dependence on what do they remain standing? These 5 faculties, the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, and the body faculty, remain standing in dependence on vitality. And vitality remains standing in dependence on what? Vitality remains standing in dependence on heat. And heat remains standing in dependence on what? Heat remains standing in dependence on vitality. Just now, friend Sāriputta, we understood you to say, vitality remains standing in dependence on heat. And just now we understood you to say, heat remains standing in dependence on vitality. Now how is the meaning of these statements to be seen? In that case, friend, I will give you an analogy, for there are cases where it is through an analogy that an intelligent person understands the meaning of a statement. Suppose an oil lamp is burning. Its radiance is discerned in dependence on its flame, and its flame is discerned in dependence on its radiance. In the same way, vitality remains standing in dependence on heat, and heat remains standing in dependence on vitality. Friend, are vitality fabrications the same thing as feeling states? Or are vitality fabrications one thing and feeling states another? Vitality fabrications are not the same thing as feeling states, friend. If vitality fabrications were the same thing as feeling states, the emergence of a monk from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling would not be discerned. It's because vitality fabrications are one thing and feeling states another that the emergence of a monk from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling is discerned. When this body lacks how many qualities does it lie discarded and forsaken like a senseless log? When this body lacks 3 qualities, vitality, heat, and consciousness, it lies discarded and forsaken like a senseless log. What is the difference between one who is dead, who has completed his time, and a monk who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling? In the case of one who is dead, who has completed his time, his bodily fabrications have ceased and subsided. His verbal fabrications have ceased and subsided. His mental fabrications have ceased and subsided. His vitality is exhausted, his heat dissipated, and his faculties are scattered. But in the case of a monk who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling, his bodily fabrications have ceased and subsided. His verbal fabrications have ceased and subsided. His mental fabrications have ceased and subsided. His vitality is not exhausted. His heat has not dissipated, and his faculties are exceptionally clear. This is the difference between one who is dead, one who has completed his time, and a monk who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling. Friend, how many conditions are there for the attainment of the neither pleasant nor painful awareness release? Friend, there are 4 conditions for the attainment of the neither pleasant nor painful awareness release. There is the case where a monk, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the earlier disappearance of elation and distress, enters and remains in the 4th jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. These are the 4 conditions for the attainment of the neither pleasant nor painful awareness release. How many conditions are there for the attainment of the themeless awareness release? There are 2 conditions for the attainment of the themeless awareness release: lack of attention to all themes and attention to the themeless property. These are the 2 conditions for the attainment of the themeless awareness release. And how many conditions are there for the persistence of the themeless awareness release? There are 3 conditions for the persistence of the themeless awareness release: lack of attention to all themes, attention to the themeless property, and a prior act of will. These are the 3 conditions for the persistence of the themeless awareness release. And how many conditions are there for the emergence from the themeless awareness release. There are two conditions for the emergence from the themeless awareness release: attention to all themes and lack of attention to the themeless property. These are the two conditions for the emergence from the themeless awareness release. The immeasurable awareness release, the nothingness awareness release, the emptiness awareness release, the themeless awareness release. Are these qualities different in meaning and different in name, or are they one in meaning and different only in name? The immeasurable awareness release, the nothingness awareness release, the emptiness awareness release, the themeless awareness release. There is a way of explanation by which these qualities are different in meaning and different in name, and there is a way of explanation by which these qualities are one in meaning and different only in name. And what is the way of explanation by which these qualities are different in meaning and different in name? There is the case where a monk keeps pervading the first direction, as well as the second direction, the third and the fourth, with an awareness imbued with goodwill. Thus, he keeps pervading, above, below, and all around, everywhere, in every respect, the all-encompassing world, with an awareness imbued with goodwill, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. He keeps pervading the first direction, as well as the second direction, the third and the fourth, with an awareness imbued with compassion. Thus, he keeps pervading, above, below, and all around, everywhere, and in every respect, the all-encompassing world, with an awareness imbued with compassion, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. He keeps pervading the first direction, as well as the second direction, the third and the fourth, with an awareness imbued with sympathetic joy. Thus, he keeps pervading above, below, all around, everywhere, in every respect, the all-encompassing world, with an awareness imbued with sympathetic joy. Abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. He keeps pervading the first direction, as well as the second direction, the third, and the fourth, with an awareness imbued with equanimity. Thus, he keeps pervading, above, below, and all around, everywhere, and in every respect, the all-encompassing world, with an awareness imbued with equanimity, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. This is called the immeasurable awareness release. And what is the nothingness awareness release? There is the case where a monk, with the complete transcending of the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, thinking, there is nothing, enters and remains in the dimension of nothingness. This is called the nothingness awareness release. And what is the emptiness awareness release? There is the case where a monk, having gone into the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or into an empty dwelling, considers this. This is empty of self, or of anything pertaining to self. This is called the emptiness awareness release. And what is the themeless awareness release? There is the case where a monk, through not attending to all themes, enters and remains in the themeless concentration of awareness. This is called the themeless awareness release. This is the way of explaining by which these qualities are different in meaning and different in name. And what is the way of explaining whereby these qualities are one in meaning and different only in name? Greed, friend, is a making of measurement. Hatred is a making of measurement. Delusion is a making of measurement. In a monk whose effluents are ended, these have been abandoned, their root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Now, to the extent that there is immeasurable awareness release, the unshakable awareness release is declared the foremost, and this unshakable awareness release is empty of greed, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. Greed is a something, hatred is a something, delusion is a something. In a monk whose effluents are ended, these have been abandoned, their root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Now, to the extent that there is nothingness awareness release, the unshakable awareness release is declared the foremost. And this unshakable awareness release is empty of greed, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. Greed is a making of themes. Hatred is a making of themes. Delusion is a making of themes. In a monk whose effluents are ended, these have been abandoned, their root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Now, to the extent that there is themeless awareness release, the unshakable awareness release is declared the foremost, and this unshakable awareness release is empty of greed, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. This, friend, is the way of explaining whereby these qualities are one in meaning and different only in name. That is what Venerable Sāriputta said. Gratified, Venerable Mahā delighted in Venerable Sāriputta's words.